This is the video submission for the midterm assignment for Kyle Cartwright, Ashley Phillips, and Marcus Thornton for the Managerial Economics class. We're going to be talking about the foundations of managerial economics and why we should study economics. Economics affects every aspect of our daily lives. From a managerial perspective, understanding economics is key when making decisions that influence the profitability of the firm. From a consumer's perspective, economics influences your quality of living and drives your motive for making decisions based on consumption. Our main goal in the management of a firm is to maximize profit or minimize losses. Profit is defined as the financial gain of a firm, especially the difference between the amount earned and the amount spent in buying, operating, or producing something. There are two types of profit we're going to talk about: accounting profit and economic profit. Accounting profit is defined as monetary profit found by comparing total revenues of the firm to the total costs of the firm, whereas economic profit expounds on that concept of accounting profit by taking opportunity costs into effect also. Opportunity costs is considered to be the potential benefit that could have been gained from specific resources if they had been allocated differently. So when resources such as time or capital are allocated to a particular use, the opportunity to use those resources for other uses is lost. When the value of a firm's accounting or economic profit is negative, this negative change is called a loss. In situations where a profit cannot be made, but it is still impractical to close the product line, the firm will seek to minimize their losses. One example of this would be when a company drops prices below cost to try to maintain or expand its market share. To help decide what course of action is best to maximize profit, we can predict how the consumers, or try to predict how the consumers, producers, and the market as a whole operate through consumer theory, producer theory, and market theory. Consumer theory is a theory in economics that tries to explain the relationship between consumer purchasing choices and income. In regards to the consumer theory, we make assumptions as to how consumers will react. Consumers are rational. We expect them to try to maximize utility. There is perfect information. We assume consumers know everything about the product. And consumers are price takers. We assume that they cannot negotiate. Price is linear. We assume that each unit has the same price, no discount for quantity purchases. Goods are divisible. We assume that each unit comes individually, not in packages. And consumers abide by budget constraint. We assume that they won't spend more than what they can afford. Rational consumers will choose a vector of goods to maximize utility subject to a budget constraint. Utility is defined as usefulness or satisfaction. The idea behind the consumer theory is that the consumer will maximize their utility with the budget constraint they have. If we know either the equation for utility or the consumer's preference vector along with the consumer's budget and the price of both goods, we can solve for what amount of each good the consumer will purchase. Marginal utility is the utility of the next unit of a good, is defined as the utility of the next unit of a good that unit provides to the customer. The law of diminishing utility says that as you have more and more of an item, you get less utility from it. So, for example, if you're really craving Oreos, if you eat a few Oreos, your satisfaction is high for each cookie. But after 10 or more Oreos, the next cookie won't give you as much satisfaction. We consider goods to be either substitutes or complements. So if substitute goods are products that can be substituted for one another, whereas complementary goods are products that are commonly purchased together. For example, a consumer might have tacos or spaghetti for dinner, but not both because they are substitutes. If the consumer has spaghetti, they might have wine because it is a complement. We also have inferior goods, which are products that are demanded less as income rises. For example, college students may demand ramen noodles when they're living on a tight budget, but once they graduate and can afford better food, they won't want ramen noodles anymore. Producer theory attempts to explain the decisions producers make in order to maximize profit. The producer can influence only two things in the production function: its capital and its labor. Capital is defined as the resources used in the production of goods and services, and labor is human activity that is employed in the production of those goods. The production process includes inputs and outputs. We input capital, which includes resources and experience in land, and labor, manpower, and outputs include products such as cars, hamburgers, computers, and other goods. Once inputs have been changed into outputs, the product will need to be sold in order for the firm to make a profit. Cost can be defined as the cost to producers. For example, a birdhouse would require a certain amount of wood and hardware to assemble. The value of the wood and hardware would be the cost of making the birdhouse. The law of diminishing returns states that as more and more of an input is added to a production process, after a certain point, the additional output of each unit decreases. For example, imagine you worked at Subway. Originally, you only have one employee. Not much would get done. If you had another employee, more would get done. The efficiency would improve. But imagine if you have 10 people in the kitchen. It would make it hard to move around and get stuff done. Imagine 10,000 people in the kitchen. You wouldn't get anything done. Short-run production. In the short run, capital is held constant. The producer can only change the firm's labor. In long-run production, the producer can change both capital and labor. Perfect substitutes are goods that are defined. Perfect substitutes in producer theory happen when capital and labor are interchangeable and both provide an equal output. Perfect complements in production, that's when you need a certain amount of labor to a certain amount of capital proportional to each other, and having extra in one or the other does not increase production. The economic market is defined as a collection of producers and consumers for a given product or service. Generally, we assume that there is competition within the market, which means that there are many producers and consumers. This type of market is called perfect competition. A monopoly, we're going to talk about a few different types of markets. The first one we're going to talk about is a monopoly, which is a market with only one seller or producer for a given product. There's generally no acceptable substitute for the product, forcing the consumer to accept the given price from the seller. For example, John Rockefeller's company, Standard Oil Company, had a monopoly on the oil industry in the 1800s. A monopsony is a market where there are only a few buyers for a certain product, and those buyers control the price. For example, military technology is a product that only the government is permitted to buy. Therefore, the government has power over the price of that product. Equilibrium in the market exists for both the consumer and producer theories when the marginal benefit of the unit is equal to the marginal cost of the unit. The law of demand states that as prices rise, quantity demanded falls, and the law of supply states that as prices rise, quantity supplied rises. Equilibrium happens when demand and supply are equal, maximizing benefits to both consumers and producers and making the best use of resources. We're also going to talk a little bit about efficiency versus equity. Efficiency basically states that resources should be used by those who can produce the most with those given resources, whereas equity is the idea of distributing resources equally throughout society for equal opportunity to all members of the market, regardless of how efficient they use those resources. The benefit of efficiency is that the most output is generated with the limited amount of resources that we have available, whereas equity spreads the wealth out, promoting more spending and faster economic development. The economic way of thinking, you may have heard of that in the news or the radio, but what does it mean? It means that we want to get the highest and best use of our resources we have. We wish to maximize our utility as consumers and profits as producers, but the best use of resources in a market is not that simple. John Maynard Keynes was an economic philosopher who believed that government intervention and stimulus is necessary and important to a successful economy. Friedrich Hayek was also an economic philosopher who opposed Keynes. He believed that the economy is the most successful when the market drives itself and is free from government control. The market we have in the United States is called capitalism. Capitalism relies on the use of private capital in production. Company decisions are made by the firms. Socialism is the philosophy that wealth generated in the market should be shared equally by those who work, but those who work more receive more. Company decisions are still based on the firm. Communism, which is the opposite of capitalism, is mostly concerned with the use of labor in the production of resources. Production capital is considered to be owned by society as a whole and is shared. Company decisions are made by the state. What should we take away from this presentation? Individually, we want to maximize the use of resources to maximize our satisfaction and profits. Our equilibrium is achieved by marginal cost being equal to marginal benefit. Market equilibrium is when supply equals demand, and in a society, we want to maximize the effectiveness of resources with efficiency and equity. There's no solid answer as to how to achieve this, and different theories and ways of thinking have developed.